This is Minda Wilson with Urgent Care, and today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Megan Megale. She is PR extraordinary woman. She has raised an exceptional daughter who is now in college, and she has used her personal family to help other people who are working through the issues related to opioid addiction, and all that in one person. It's really remarkable. Welcome, Megan.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So all of this really started from your perspective as a mom, sort of having to struggle with the issues of raising kids.
So I am the proud mother of 3 children. My oldest daughter, Kelly, my middle son was Matthew, and my youngest daughter, Shea. Shea struggles with a form of muscular dystrophy, so she's in a motorized wheelchair. And Matthew, who is my son that has passed, was her main caregiver because my husband traveled quite frequently. And so he would help me lift her and shower her. And he also struggled himself with a 10-year opioid addiction that started at the age of 16. And we all struggled through that because it is a family crisis. And Matthew and Shea, unbeknownst to myself, had made a pact. And Matthew said, you are so smart. I want you to apply to colleges and I will go with you and I'll care for you because I'm just very fearful that I'm not going to be able to get over this opioid addiction, even though he had been to treatment 3 times. And so Shea then applied to 13 colleges. She got into 11 prominent colleges. And 2 months later, Matthew overdosed a combination of heroin and fentanyl. And all of our worlds fell apart, to say the least.
Was it an effective tool, the counseling?
It did. It was different for all of us, to be very honest with you. Shea is still in counseling and compliant in counseling, and she's benefited greatly from it. I tried counseling, and I had trouble finding a counselor that I was able to really connect with. And when you are seeking that, and you're also mourning and trying to support your family and your other kids, it just, it became a frustration for me because I just couldn't find anyone that, that I really felt I would benefit from. So it varied between all of us. So yes, I think it's very unique to the person.
What you're saying though is that when you're in the midst of tragedy, you need a safe place of your own, and that
Absolutely.
You shouldn't, and that not everyone is going to be that safe place for you in terms of a counselor. It's sort of like one bad date. Just because you've had one bad date doesn't mean every person you date is not going to work out for you.
Yeah, and especially in crises like this one. I mean, this is not anything in my lifetime I ever thought I would encounter. We have no addiction in my family at all. I don't drink. I've never done drugs. And then the grieving process of losing a child.
Oh yeah.
These were on that. There's no book that that would give me any comfort. So yeah, counseling is important. Yes, very important.
You don't always get it right the first time, and they don't always get you the first time.
Yeah, and I think it'd be safer to say you rarely get it right the first time.
Right.
I mean, because even with Shea, we went through 4 counselors, and she'd come out and she'd say, "Not the one, not the one." So, I think the expectation should be going into it. You really have to have an open mind and just continue to seek it.
Yeah. So the interesting thing that you point out is that opioid is a family problem. Addiction is a family problem. It's not just really the problem. And what do you mean by that when you say that?
Well, so, I always felt like this was Matthew's problem. But I realized in the aftermath, I was as sick as Matthew because I became his frontline person, finding treatment, bringing him to treatment, being his cheerleader. And sometimes, I would say to Matt, I feel like I want this more than you do. Why is that? And the reason for that was because I became as sick as he did in, trying to figure this out for him rather than with him. And that was a realization that, after his passing, I came to terms with.
How do you transition yourself to being for someone to with someone? Now that you've had this experience, how would you advise someone to do that?
Yeah, I think you need somebody from the outside looking in, because, for me, I was handling it for my husband who traveled. I was handling it for my daughter because I didn't want her to be involved. And, and rather than being the frontline person, what I really should have done was said to Matt, you tell me where you want to go to treatment, because then he's not being forced to go, he's choosing to go. And that's the difference. And I think, had I taken a different tactic with Matt, he might have been more invested.
So getting the person that has the problem invested in changing is the key.
Yes, because I can't change that. He had to do that himself. But I felt that I could influence it, and I couldn't. He continued, going to, he was sent to treatment 3 times. And as a family, we have started a foundation called AmericanBoy.org, and we are giving away treatment scholarships to people with no resources. And what the project addresses is there's 3 obstacles that Matthew could not overcome in his quest for sobriety. And the first one is that 28 days is what insurance pays. And we were grateful for the insurance, but 28 days in treatment is never enough to overcome an addiction. And, Matthew was a millennial, and I need sneakers. I go on Amazon and order them. They're at my door the next day, right? It's the age of the millennial. And he addressed his treatment in the same fashion. After 28 days, I'm good. I got this. And I wanted to believe that. Yeah. Right? And so, 28 days, you barely are thinking straight again. And you need to continue your treatment. So that was a big obstacle for Matt.
And then what? And the second, so that was the first thing is
the first thing. The second one is the stigma of addiction. And I'll tell you a story that will illustrate what I mean by that. I started a public relations firm, and I represent professional athletes. I don't even watch sports. So it's kind of a crazy thing that I went into, but I did it with the hope that my son would join me, because anyone with a drug addiction likely has either a misdemeanor or a felony, and Matthew did. And so when he would try to get a job, he'd come to that box. Do you have a misdemeanor or a felony? And he would ask me, Mom, what should I do? And I knew in my adult brain, the thing to do was to be honest, but I also knew he'd never get a call back. So I was on my way back from New York. We live in Virginia. And he called me and said, Mom, I got a job. And I said, oh, Matt, that's great. I'll be home in an hour. And I walked in the door in my suit, and he had a T-shirt on that said Poop 911. And I said to him, where did you get that T-shirt? I certainly didn't buy it for you. And he said, no, Mom, this is my new job. I am cleaning up dog crap because I am a piece of crap. And my heart broke into a million pieces. So the stigma of addiction, Matthew just never felt he was worthy after people found out that he struggled with addiction. And that's crazy, because addiction is a disease. And, you certainly wouldn't be judged if you had cancer or any other disease, but people with addiction struggle with that all the time. I don't want to hire you because I don't want to take a chance. I'm going to hire somebody else because they're not struggling with that. And so finding worthy employment for somebody that's struggling to stay sober is critically important. And the third thing was we are creating something called the Programs of Excellence. And those are treatment centers that addiction experts have referred to us, or parents who have had loved ones go through the treatment center and had a very good experience with it, because it's extremely hard to vet a treatment program. Right. You automatically turn to the internet because there's no other resources for you. And you just start looking at treatment centers, and the only thing you can use are reviews, and you have no idea who wrote the reviews. There's no credible Angie's List type resource for families that are looking for treatment. And it's really important to find the right treatment program for your loved one, because if you don't find the right one, it's 28 days of just getting sober and no community following you, and you're off and running, and you likely relapse. So those are the three obstacles that Matthew struggled with, and we struggled with as a family, that we are addressing in this program.
Right. I've learned that in it's very difficult to evaluate the clinics because a lot of them are just sort of money-making devices.
Yes, there's a lot of bad ones, more bad than good, unfortunately.
And so it's hard to know, and in terms of success rate, you don't really get, because of the privacy issues. It's very difficult to evaluate whether or not they're successful, and they don't give you references saying talk to this person who's been through the program.
Right, absolutely not. It's very, very difficult, and when you think about how you would go after, if you or I were diagnosed with breast cancer, we'd be vetting doctors right and left. We'd be going to Mayo Clinic. You have credible resources to turn to.
Right.
And, when you have a child that comes to you and says, Mom, I need help, your goal is to get them in treatment quickly before they change their mind. And so, when you find a program and they say, we have a bed available, really, you drive your child there and you just pray to God that he's in a place that will care for him and love him and get him through this and get him back on the right track. But you have no idea. So that has to change. That has to change.
Mm-hmm.
The way that people go about getting and finding treatment for their loved one is just, it's like the Wild West. And it's not cheap to send somebody to treatment, because not all insurers are as wonderful as ours was. So, navigating the insurance is also hard. But people will do anything to save their child. I would have done anything. I would have worked 19 jobs if I couldn't get health insurance. So it's a very, very complex issue. And it's during a very difficult time in a family's life that, you're not thinking as clearly as you likely would, when you made a major purchase for something else.
Right, exactly. So for those people who have a child that's struggling and the child doesn't want to change, some people are just, overwhelmed by their addiction. What do you recommend for those people? What's your best advice for them?
Yeah, that's a very hard question, because most families, and my family was no exception to this, my husband took a very hard line: kick him out. And I would say to my husband, I'm not kicking my child out because he'll be dead in a week, right? So it's a very, very hard decision to make. And some people that have, washed their hands of their child and said, listen, until you're ready to get help, you can't live here. Some of those kids have done well and that have responded to that, but other kids haven't. So, my advice is to try to talk to your child. I mean, it's such a volatile conversation, and it's such, we would have screaming matches, and Matthew would, you'll never see me again, and it was horrible. And I think if you have a child that's older than 18, you've got to sit down and let them know, listen, I'm your advocate here. I'm on your side. I want you to get better, but I can't do it for you. And and they'll respond better to that than the screaming match that we had often had at our home. And when we did that with Matt, it was a better way to do it. So I've learned that. I mean, Shea, my youngest daughter, Shea, has written a book called American Boy that chronicles what the decisions our family made. And, and even though Matt is no longer here, it doesn't mean that we made bad decisions all the time.
Right.
But Dr. Carrie Wilkins, who runs the Center for Motivation and Change, then does the afterword and addresses some of the things that we did and ways we could have done them better. So we're so hopeful that anyone struggling, and it's hard to find someone that hasn't been touched by this opioid epidemic.
Right.
This book will be a window into I'm not alone, because I never felt like I could talk to anyone. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you call your neighbor and go, listen, my kid's doing heroin.
Right.
And you want to come over for a cup of tea? I mean, you're ashamed, right?
Right.
And I remember a woman in my neighborhood who I knew their child was also involved with heroin. I remember seeing her in the food store one day and thinking, oh my gosh, someone that I can talk to. And I went over and introduced myself, and I knew she knew about Matthew because the kids were friends. And I asked about her son, trying to open up this conversation. And you know what she said to me? Well, we sent so-and-so to boarding school. And I looked at her and I thought, there's not a boarding school in the world that would have taken your child.
Right.
He was a heroin addict. What do you, just be honest. I mean, Matt's in treatment. Maybe they're roommates. He's not at boarding school. But it's that kind of, stigma that impedes people from reaching out to one another. So that's my story about addiction. And, I mean, we're so hopeful that we will, as difficult as it is to put our family's decision-making out there and our story, it is very difficult for us. But, we agreed when Shea wrote it that if we don't tell the truth, then we're no different than the person telling me their kid's in boarding school, because we're creating more stigma. So we put it out there. We're hoping people will learn from it. We know they will. And with Dr. Wilkins commenting on better ways that it could have been handled, we really hope this book becomes a reference for families that are struggling.
Right. And some of the other thing is, how do you know or just regular teenage angst, or how do you, what are some of the things that you can sort of look for that might be helpful signs?
The red flags. Yeah. Well, it's very clear. I mean, your child will no longer be hanging out with the friends he normally did, because they're likely saying to him, if you're doing that, we're not hanging with you. That's number one. You can tell the way they're grooming themselves, their dress. They're not showering as often as they did. They were playing lacrosse. They no longer are. We knew and we suspected, and we were watching Matthew like a hawk, because we were just waiting for that opportunity to say, okay, we know now, and we were so, and I found a syringe in his room, and we approached him, and he said, oh, that's one of my friends who's a diabetic. And we knew that wasn't the truth. Missing money, just activities that your child knows better, but he does them anyway. Stealing money out of my wallet. I'd be like, wait a minute. I mean, I had $20. Where did it go? Did I drive through Chick-fil-A? I mean, no. My son took it. So those are the things that you look for, and don't ignore them. I mean, you don't want to address it. Believe me, the last thing I wanted to think was that my child was doing drugs, but don't ignore it. You've got to address it, because the sooner you do, and especially if you can, if they're under 18, you have a lot more leverage with, getting your child to treatment than after 18 when they have to agree to go. So, so those would be the signs I would recommend.
Right. And just recognize too that it's not, in the hippie days, it might have been cool and experimental, but when you're talking about opioids or heroin, it's none of that, right?
It's none of that, because heroin is cheap. And that's what it boils down to. The kids have no money, and heroin is cheap, and it's easy to get, and it's everywhere. So it is different than when you and I grew up. And I mean, it's everywhere. It's in every community. It's everywhere.
Yeah. And if that's, and because of that, you are there resources that, let's say someone doesn't have an awareness, is there a resource that they can educate themselves about before they?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I would encourage them to go on our website. Yeah. And start educating yourself. We're always here to talk with you. And the other thing that, that I want to point out is, not everyone had the financial resources that we did. Right. Mm-hmm. And so our goal is every month we are going to be giving away to a worthy candidate that has no resources, no insurance, a full treatment scholarship. So, we're just trying to do our part, and we're crowdfunding those. And there's hope for everyone is what we want to communicate. Everyone, there's hope for everybody. And because we lost Matt doesn't mean that, this project was one of failure. It wasn't at all. It's one of educating people and honoring Matt's life in changing the lives of others.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that people who've suffered loss of family members from opioid addiction, it's not, it's not necessarily their fault, right? That they can't really take the blame on themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's difficult to tell any parent you don't have any faults. And as valid as your point is, I don't think I'll ever be able to part with the fact or come to terms with the fact that I couldn't have done something better than what I did. So, as much as people say that to me, it's just one of those things that, I know in my head is accurate, but in my heart it never will be, because I no longer have my son.
Right.
So you're right. It isn't your fault. But I would fully understand any parent saying, I'll never be the same person I was before he passed.
Oh, of course. But that's true. Yeah. That's true. Addiction has its own special horrors, but, losing a child is a, there's nothing that could be worse, because it's not nothing. The order of things.
There's nothing. So, right. There's nothing. You're right.
So but what I'm trying to say is that your life, like you've taken a horrible disaster and sort of tried to make something positive from it. And you've been able to, and what I want to say is that for parents who have lost someone, there are resources for them too. And it's not something that they should take on themselves and just turn exclusively inward, right?
Right. That's true. Yes.
And there's support for them too. And in your program and contributing to a program like yours, they can make a contribution and help someone else.
Absolutely. we hope people will pay it forward, because that's what this program is all about.
And the other thing that's sort of amazing to me is that how your daughter has come through it. I mean, she was very close to Matthew. She's
yeah.
She's in,
I mean, she struggles every day. We all do. But, she knows she has to move on. There's no choice but to move forward. And she is in college now. And, it's very difficult for her because, we have caregivers rather than Matt. And every day she's reminded it should have been my best friend here helping me. So, I mean, she's moving on as best she knows how with the help of counseling.
And writing the book. I'm sure that
writing the book, was very difficult to write the book, but the reward will be seeing people helped through her writing. And she's an exquisite writer. So, I'd encourage everybody to get the book, because it's raw, and it's, even if you don't have addiction in your family, it's going to at least help you understand the chaos that the families that do go through. And you'll be much more empathetic towards, rather than being judgmental, you'll be far more empathetic towards, the struggles internally of a family that's going through a loved one with addiction.
It's just an amazing journey you've been on, and that you've been willing to share it with people.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's just, I so appreciate it. And if people want to reach out to you, or contribute through your scholarship funds, what is the best way that they can do that?
It is www.americanboy.org, and all of the resources, information, all our contact information, anything they need, we are here.
Megan, thank you for coming.
Great.
And this is Minda Wilson for Urgent Care.